Hey guys, in today's video, I bring you an impactful and transformative story that will challenge your vision of the future of humanity. Discover the story of a therapist who, at the age of 36, went through a near-death experience after a devastating aneurysm. During this journey, she encountered God and received an urgent revelation about the danger of new technologies and the impact they can have on our lives and souls. What she saw on the other side and the messages she brought will move you deeply. So, before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any content like this. Get ready for a journey that will open your eyes and touch your heart. My life seemed normal to anyone. I was a therapist, living in Boulder, Colorado with my husband, Elliot. At age 36, he had built a solid career, known for helping patients face their trauma and find resilience. However, the truth I was hiding, even from myself, was that while I was helping others reconnect with their feelings, I was increasingly disconnected from my own. Elliot and I moved to Boulder 5 years ago, seeking a calmer, more balanced environment. He was a software engineer, passionate about solving logical problems, but always skeptical about spiritual matters. Although we were happy in many ways, there was something missing in our relationship, a depth we never named but we both felt. My childhood had been shaped by Roman Catholicism. My devout parents believed that faith would be my greatest foundation. However, after losing them in a tragic car accident when I was 19, my faith began to crumble. For years, I looked for explanations for his departure in books, therapies, and even small spiritual experiences, but I never found anything that satisfied me. It was easier to blame God and walk away. This spiritual disconnection affected my worldview. I worked hard to help my patients, but there were nights when I felt like a fraud, like I wasn't living up to the advice I was giving. My life was a cycle of work, gym, and quiet time at home, without high aspirations or deeper connections. Routine filled the void, but never healed it. It was in this context that Holy Saturday arrived. I wanted to feel at peace, like an extra day of exercise and productivity could ease my restless mind. I was determined to prove to myself that I could have control over something, even if it was my own body. I didn't know that that day would be a turning point, that a simple trip to the gym would take me to the threshold between life and death, and most importantly, I didn't know that God, whose presence I had denied for years, was about to show me a truth that would transform not just my life, but my view of what it truly means to live. The day started like any other, but carried a different weight. It was Holy Saturday, the day before Easter, and I had woken up earlier than usual. There was something in me, a restlessness that I couldn't identify. Maybe it was the brunch we were hosting, or maybe it was the loneliness that always haunted my mind. I decided to go to the gym to clear my head. As I used to tell Elliot, "Don't overdo it, Sarah," he said while drinking coffee, without looking away from his laptop. "You're stressed. You're going to end up hurting yourself." "I know my limits," I replied, with a confidence that I now recognize as blind. The gym was busy, but that never bothered me. I chose the farthest corner, where I used to do my strength training. After warming up, I decided to challenge myself. I don't know what motivated me at that moment. Maybe it was the feeling that something in me needed to be overcome, broken, rebuilt. I added more weight to the bar than usual, adjusted my gloves, and prepared myself. I started the exercise, maintaining perfect posture, but on the third movement, I felt it. It was as if a knife had gone through my neck. A sharp, overwhelming pain radiated through my head, making my body shake. I let go of the bar and tried to support myself on my knees, but my legs gave out. The room around me spun. The voices became distant, like echoes inside a tunnel. "Someone, please," was all I could say before I collapsed. I woke up briefly on a stretcher as paramedics loaded me into the ambulance. One of them held my hand and told me, "We're here. It's going to be okay." But I knew something was terribly wrong. The pain was unbearable, as if my head was going to explode. As the ambulance moved forward, I began to mumble, "God, help me, please." It was an instinctive, almost automatic, but genuine request. I felt like I was dying, and for the first time in years I accepted the idea that maybe there was something beyond. I closed my eyes as sirens echoed in the distance. Emptiness welcomed me, and I knew my journey into the unexplainable was just beginning. The memory of the gym faded as consciousness slipped from me. Fragments of sound and light reached me, as if I were submerged in ice-cold water. The ambulance sirens mixed with the deafening buzzing inside my head, and I struggled to make sense of anything around me. I remembered opening my eyes briefly as the paramedics discussed my condition. "Blood pressure is plummeting. Possible ruptured aneurysm," said a male voice with a tone of controlled urgency. "Damn, we need to stabilize her before we get to the hospital," replied another voice, female and more hurried. Everything seemed distant, like a fragmented dream, until I felt a light touch on my hand. It was the paramedic's ringtone. I don't know why, but that human connection, so simple, was the only thing that kept me conscious for a few more moments. As the ambulance raced through the streets of Boulder, flashes of my life flashed before me, but not as a review of regrets or happy moments. It was more like a kaleidoscope, fast and indistinct, a mix of childhood images, patience, laughter, and conversations with Elliot that seemed trivial at the time. We arrived at the hospital, and I was immediately taken to the emergency room. A medical team surrounded me, their faces blurred by the bright overhead lights. I heard words like subarachnoid bleeding and imminent risk of death, but I couldn't fully understand what was happening. Excruciating pain dominated every inch of my being. It was like my head was being crushed from the inside out. Despite this, there was no fear in me at that moment, just a curious mix of acceptance and curiosity. I remembered muttering something to the doctor leaning over me, probably Dr. Geller. "Will I be okay?" He hesitated, and his response was more professional than reassuring. "I will do the best we can, but you need to be strong." As the team prepared the exams and discussed the urgent need for surgery, my body felt heavy, as if I was sinking. My vision began to darken, and a low-pitched ringing echoed in my ears, replacing all other sensations. That's when I noticed the light. It wasn't the light from the fluorescence above me, but something much softer, ethereal and warm, emerging from the upper corner of the room. She seemed to call me. In that instant, the weight of my body disappeared. When the light appeared, something profound happened. The weight that dominated my body, the pain, the despair, even the fear of the unknown, disappeared. Suddenly, I was no longer strapped to the hospital gurney. It was as if I were floating, free from any pain or physical limitations. At first, I thought it was delirium caused by pain or medication, but what I experienced next showed me that it was beyond anything science could explain. The light wasn't just bright, it was alive. She radiated an energy that was both welcoming and powerful. I felt a magnetism coming from her, as if she were calling me, guiding me. I looked down and saw my body motionless on the hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses working frantically. I remember noticing details that, until then, I could never have noticed. Elliot's wedding ring reflected the overhead light as he held my hand tightly. He was sitting next to me, his head in his hands, with a consent form for the surgery crumpled next to him. He was crying, but he wasn't making any noise. It was a silent cry, filled with a pain I had never seen in him before. I asked myself, how can I be here and also there? It was a strange duality, but at the same time, it felt perfectly natural. The light in the corner of the room began to expand, forming a tunnel that seemed endless. Without realizing how, I started moving towards him. It was not like walking or flying, but a movement that transcended physical laws. I didn't have to decide to go. I just went. As he walked forward, the sound of the hospital disappeared, replaced by a deep, welcoming silence. Inside the tunnel, there was a soft glow, as if the light was woven with shades of gold and pink. It was a vision of indescribable beauty, but more than that, it was a sensation. With every meter I advanced, I felt a greater and greater peace, as if I was being filled with an energy I didn't know I needed. Halfway through the tunnel, I realized I wasn't alone. There were presences all around me, although I couldn't see them clearly. They were not human forms, but energies, like fragments of light that pulsed around me. I didn't know who or what they were, but I felt like they were there to guide me. Finally, I reached the end of the tunnel. Before me was something beyond human understanding, an illuminated, infinite space without walls or limits. All I could feel was love, an absolute, overwhelming love that seemed to fill every part of me. When crossing the tunnel, I was enveloped by an even more intense light, but it didn't hurt my eyes. It was as if all the light in the universe converged into that space, and at the same time it was soft and welcoming. There was no ground, no sky, no walls, just a vast field of pulsating energy, tinged with golden and pink hues. It was both empty and filled with something indescribably powerful. The moment I stepped or floated into that space, I felt it. I didn't see a face or a physical figure, but I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I was in the presence of God. The love that emanated from him was overwhelming. It was as if every part of my being, every cell, was filled with a wave of warmth, tenderness, and peace. I tried to speak, but I realized that words were unnecessary. God didn't need me to explain who I was or what I felt. He already knew. He knew everything about me, the pains I carried, the doubts that took me away from him, and even the little moments of joy that I had never appreciated enough. "You are not alone," was the first message I felt. Speechless, I fell to my knees, or at least I felt like I was in a position of bowing. I cried, but it wasn't out of sadness or regret. They were tears of relief, of knowing that there was something so much greater than anything I could understand. "It's not your time," came the next message. Those words echoed inside me, and for a moment, I felt conflicted. I didn't want to go back. There, in that space, there was no pain, no fears, no doubts. Everything was pure, absolute. "Please let me stay," I begged, but without words, just with my soul. I did my best. I helped people. I was good. God responded with a gentleness that dismantled me. "Have you ever loved someone with all your being, as I love you now?" The question hit me like lightning. I thought about Elliot, about my patience, about my own family. Despite all my dedication and efforts, I knew the answer. No, I had never loved someone like that. "You can do better," God said, but there was no judgment or reproof in his message, just an opportunity to grow, to be more, to truly connect with others. I felt God's absolute love surrounding me like a promise, but also a responsibility. Still, something more was coming. While I was still enveloped in that absolute love, I felt a subtle change in the environment. The light around me seemed to vibrate differently, as if it was getting ready to show me something. It was then that God shared with me a vision that, to this day, I can barely describe without feeling a lump in my throat. "I want you to see something important," he said, not with words, but with a clarity that went straight to my soul. Suddenly, I was transported to what seemed like the near future. I was in an urban landscape, but everything felt distorted, dehumanized. People walked the streets, but their faces were blank, expressionless. Everyone held devices in their hands, connected to something I couldn't see but clearly controlled them. It was as if they were mere puppets, unable to act on their own. I felt a cold run through my being. "What is that?" I asked mentally, already fearing the answer. "It is the future that some wish to create," God responded. "They don't realize they are giving their souls to forces they don't understand." Images began to flash before me. I saw world leaders meeting in secret, planning to use advanced technologies to manipulate people's minds. I saw devices that invaded thoughts, restricting individual freedom. It was scary, but the most disturbing thing was realizing how indifferently all of this was being accepted by humanity. "Who are these forces?" I asked, trying to understand the origin of so much evil. "Ego," he replied, with devastating simplicity. "Those who act only for their own benefit create imbalances that affect everyone. But remember, true love is more powerful than any darkness." Then I was shown an alternative. It was a vision of hope. I saw people resisting manipulation, connecting to each other with compassion and courage. I saw simple acts of kindness that created waves of light, driving away the darkness. "You will be part of this," said God. "That is why you must return. The love and compassion you will spread will be your weapon against these forces." The images stopped, and I found myself in that illuminated space again. God's love still enveloped me, but now it came with a clear mission. Although my heart wanted to stay there, I knew I had something important to do back in the physical world. The decision to return was not mine. Even after everything I had seen and felt, I wanted to remain in that space of absolute love and infinite peace. There was no pain there, no fear, no incessant questions that plagued me in life. But God, in His immensity, made it clear that it was not my time yet. "You must come back," I felt once more, with a gentle firmness that seemed impossible to dispute. A feeling of movement enveloped me, as if I were being pulled by an irresistible force. At first I tried to resist, stuck in that place where I finally felt complete. But God's voice echoed again. Your mission is not complete. Trust me. Suddenly, I felt an intense impact, as if my spirit was being pressed back into my body. The feeling of lightness disappeared, replaced by a crushing heaviness. The pain came back like a storm, and the sound of the hospital environment filled my ears. I slowly opened my eyes and found Elliot's face. He was leaning over me, holding my hand so tightly his knuckles were white. His eyes were red, and tears were streaming down his face. He tried to speak, but the words came out as a broken whisper. You're here, he said, with a mixture of relief and disbelief. I'm not going to die, I murmured, my voice weak but filled with an inexplicable certainty. God told me it's not my time. Elliot blinked, confused, as if trying to understand what I had just said. He turned to the doctor, Dr. Geller, who was standing next to the bed with a look of restrained relief. We need your authorization for the surgery, she said firmly, placing the form in front of me. Do whatever you have to, I replied, with the conviction of someone who knew they would survive. As I was prepped for surgery, my body was still suffering from the effects of the aneurysm and hemorrhage, but my mind was clear. I knew there was something much bigger sustaining me. The memories of what I experienced on the other side were still alive in me, like a flame that couldn't be put out. Before being sedated, I looked at Elliot one last time. Trust, I'll be back, and we'll have a lot to talk about. I woke up after surgery with unbearable but vivid pain. My body felt heavy, like it was carrying the weight of everything I had experienced. My head was pounding, and my vision was blurry, but I knew I was here for a bigger reason. Elliot was next to me when my eyes opened. He looked exhausted, but his relief was palpable. You did it, he said, squeezing my hand tightly. I told you I'd be back, I replied with a weak smile, but he just shook his head, as if he still couldn't believe it. The following days were a mixture of physical pain and reflective silence. My recovery was slow. Every movement was a reminder of how fragile my body still was. The nurses were kind, but I avoided long conversations. My mind was caught up in the visions and divine presence I felt during the near-death experience. One night, when I was alone in the hospital room, I looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "Why did you send me back?" Tears streamed down my face as I relived the incomparable love I had felt in that bright space. The silence was deep, but not empty. There was no audible response, but I felt something inside me, a calm, a certainty that my mission was to love, teach, and resist the forces I had seen in the future. Elliot was my biggest challenge. He was a logical man, an engineer who believed in science and facts. When I finally told him about my experience, he was silent for a long time. "Do you think that was real?" he asked, his voice cautious. "It was more real than anything I've ever experienced here," I replied. "I didn't just see it. I felt it. God is there, Elliot. He's real, and he loves us in ways we can't imagine." He shook his head, clearly uncomfortable. "Maybe it was your mind, a kind of trauma response, a defense mechanism. If that were true, Elliot, why do I feel so different? Why do I feel so full of purpose, even after almost dying?" He didn't respond, but I knew it deeply disturbed him. As the days went by, post-NDE depression began to set in. I missed that space of absolute love, that divine connection. Returning to earthly life and with its pain and limitations seemed almost like a punishment. But each time despair hit me, I remembered God's words, "You can do better. Love is the answer." My physical recovery continued slowly but steadily. Each day brought challenges, not just in the body, but in the soul. It was as if the near-death experience had broken something inside me, a barrier I didn't even know existed. What once felt like a comfortable emptiness was now a constant call, almost a demand, for me to be better, more compassionate, more connected to the people around me. Returning to the office to work with my patients was one of the most difficult steps. Before, I saw them as problems to be solved. Now each of them seemed to bring a unique light, a reflection of that divine interconnection I experienced during the NDE. I listened to them more carefully, seeking to understand them on a deeper level. One patient in particular, Rachel, made an impression on me. She was struggling with devastating grief after losing her 8-year-old daughter to cancer. Before the NDE, I would have offered techniques to help her manage her pain. Now, I felt like I needed to do more. Rachel, do you ever feel like the connection with your daughter still exists in some way? I asked in one session. She hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. Sometimes, but it feels more like a fantasy, something I make up to comfort myself. I think she's still with you, he said, with the same certainty he felt toward God. The love you shared transcends any barriers. It is eternal, Rachel cried, and, for the first time in months, talked about the joy of being a mother, rather than just the pain of loss. My relationship with Elliot also started to change. He struggled to understand the new person I was becoming, and I knew it wasn't easy for him. One night, as we ate dinner in silence, I decided to confront the tension that had built between us. Elliot, do you think I'm crazy for believing what I experienced? I asked, breaking the silence. He put down his fork and sighed. I don't think you're crazy. I think it's hard for me to understand something so intangible. I don't want you to understand, he said, holding her hand. I want you to trust me. I want you to trust the love that surrounds us, even if we can't see it. He shook my hand and smiled, hesitant but sincere. I'm trying. Although our differences persisted, that night marked the beginning of a new kind of intimacy, built on mutual acceptance. The changes in me were not just internal. People around me started to notice. Colleagues commented that my approach seemed more empathetic, more intuitive. Friends said I seemed more serene, more present. I knew I was just at the beginning of my journey. The divine love I felt was now my compass, guiding me every step of the way. But there was something more. The mission to warn the world about the forces that threatened this divine connection. The weight of the mission that God had entrusted to me was, at times, overwhelming. I knew it wasn't enough to just live with more love and compassion. I needed to do more, to share the truths that were revealed to me, no matter how challenging or even incomprehensible they were. However, there was an internal conflict, how to convey something so deep and vast without being seen as crazy or sensationalist. At first, my approach was silent. I started incorporating the lessons into small changes in my daily life. One of the patients who stood out was David, a young technology addict, who faced severe anxiety attacks whenever he was away from his phone or computer. During one session, I asked, "What do you feel when you're not connected?" David laughed nervously, that I'm nobody, as if I didn't exist. I looked at him with a tenderness I had never felt for a patient before. What if I told you that your essence, who you really are, has never depended on anything external, that there is something in you, beyond technology, that is waiting to connect with something greater? He was silent, and a single tear ran down his face. It was at that moment that I realized my mission didn't need to start with grand gestures. It could be as simple as helping a person reconnect with themselves. At home, Elliot continued to be my biggest challenge, and at the same time, my biggest support. He still couldn't fully understand my experience, but he was always there, willing to listen. One night, as we were sitting on the couch, I looked at him and said, "Did you know that God loves us in ways we can't even comprehend?" Elliot smiled sideways, with that skepticism that characterized him so much. "God told you that, huh?" "It didn't just tell me, it showed me, and I feel like I need to share that with people." He sighed, but his eyes softened. "If you feel like this is what you should do, I'll support you. Just don't expect me to become a believer overnight, okay?" I laughed, relieved. "I never asked for this. I just want you to trust how I feel." The revelations about the dark forces that seek to manipulate humanity never left my mind. I started researching more about technological advances and people's growing dependence on devices that often disconnect them from real life. It didn't take long for me to realize how real the visions I received were. I discovered initiatives that were already working to expose the dangers of technological control and felt I should get involved. But God's mission wasn't just about warning, it was about loving. With every step I took, I was reminded of his words. Love is more powerful than any darkness. My role was simple, but profound, to be a bridge between what I saw on the other side and what we experience here. Today, I dedicate my life to spreading the message I received, to love more deeply, resist negative influences, and find ways to reconnect humanity with the divine. I don't know if I will be successful, but I know that the effort, in itself, is already part of the purpose. And if there's one thing I can leave with you, it's this. The love that created and sustains us is real, no matter how disconnected we feel. He is always there, waiting to guide us back home. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.